Good.
So when you saw these like Greek and Roman sculptures that we see now when we go into museums, imagine them fully painted. That's what they were like. We just don't see that because now we're in, we're we're like 1,000 years later where all the paint is gone. But they were all originally painted to look lifelike as well. So, we're going to give them just a couple minutes to see if anybody else is going to show from the start. Yeah, they were all painted. Yeah. Oh, hey! Hello, how are you?
Good, how are you guys?
Quite well, quite well. Okay, now really quickly, before I go ahead and start, we open with prayer. The one thing I do want to say, guys, first off, thanks for sticking it out with me.
What? Of course.
But one thing that I have to talk to a couple of you about that I would like to mention is if there's anything that we cover that, like, the moment I say it, there's like a question or something that's attached to it, please, let's go ahead and ask now. The moment it happens, because it's not like Pastor Mark where we're in church and he mentions something, you say, "Whoa, back that truck up! I got a question," But here it's completely relaxed. If you guys have any questions about stuff like that, I will ignore you. But at least it makes it feel like you got some power. No, but
definitions of some words.
Definitions, especially stuff like that, and even more importantly, we could always just talk about something in specifics. And in all honesty, I am not the end all of everything. So if you do have a question about something, and I'll honestly say, you know what, I have no idea. I will find out for you. And then next time I see you, we can go ahead and talk about it, okay? So let's go ahead and have a short prayer for opening. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for our dear friends that have come today. Father, we ask you to please open our minds and our hearts as we learn the history of your word. And this we pray. Okay, so, hey, good morning. Come on in, guys, come on in. Alright, so let's do a short recap. Okay? We talked about Roman persecution. So basically, all the way from the time of Augustus, about 32 AD, all the way to about 300, Roman persecution. And it all depends on who the emperor was at the time period, depending on the severity of that persecution. It could be something very mild, like, well, we'll wait till they recant, and if they won't recant, then we'll deal with it to the full-on mass executions. But it all actually changed greatly in the 300s when a large amount of the aristocracy were becoming Christian as well. And the one thing that I didn't mention was not only was it the aristocracy that was becoming Christians, a huge portion of the Roman army is becoming Christian as well. See, they're doing double duty, which we're going to talk about a little bit today. A lot of, when you're dealing with a civilization that is primarily a pagan faith, so when Christianity is introduced to them, it's not like they're going to completely turn their back on their pagan faith, but they actually found altars in Roman encampments as well in Roman homes to where they will still have their pagan gods or their ancestral gods, and then they will have depictions of Christ and stuff like that. So they're like slowly adding it into their pantheon.
Be safe on both sides.
Yeah, they're being safe on both sides, which doesn't work, by the way, but it's a good start. But the one thing is that it really officially ends with the Emperor Galerius, and he was the Roman Emperor from 305 to 311, and he actually became seriously ill, and he felt that his illness was a punishment from God. And so he actually said, okay, we're not going to persecute the Christians anymore. And when he died, he actually died 5 years after he made this proclamation, that the empire becomes divided between these several gentlemen: Licinius, Maximinus Daia, Constantine, and Maxentius. Now, three of these men will actually declare Maxenius a usurper. And Dea is the only one who will still continue to persecute Christians at all. So Constantine does the one thing that's unexpected. He's supposed to just like kick back and relax. Nope. What happened is Maxenius, who had taken over the city of Rome, Constantine will cross the Alps and will wage war against him. And that'll actually happen at the Milvian Bridge. Now you guys remember I showed this to you yesterday, the depiction of Constantine at the Milvian Bridge. And Christian Chronicler tells the story that he saw a cross in the sky and he heard the words, "In this you shall conquer." And, of course, after he wins the battle, he then goes to the other emperors. And so official Christian persecution ends in 313 AD with the signing of the Edict of Milan. And basically what it means is all underground cults will now be allowed to come out and worship in public, including Christianity. So Christianity will no longer have to be practiced in a household or in the crypts, the tombs, but now it can actually come out and they can form their own churches, which is actually a cool thing. And then from 30 AD to 311 AD, there are 54 emperors. And only about a dozen of them actually persecute Christians. So let's talk about what we're talking about today. Remember how we talked about the Battle of the Milvian Bridge and Constantine? And how Constantine becomes the first Christian emperor? Not really. See, the one thing is that if you want to look at it from a strictly Christian point of view, which is great, yes, he is the first Christian emperor, but he's really not. See, the one thing is that he is the Christian emperor, but he's also doing the double duty. He no longer actually persecutes Christians, and they're allowed to practice as they wish. But if you remember last time we were here, do you guys remember what we talked about, the Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun? So we have two men that are left in power after all of this train wreck that happens. Constantine has taken over Rome. The other emperor at the time is a gentleman by the name of Licinius. These guys are not really fond of each other. And eventually what happens is they will battle it out and Constantine will win. So Constantine will become the unquestioned emperor of both the Eastern Empire and the Western Empire. The Sol Invictus. Yes?
So Constantine really wasn't the first Christian emperor because...
He's not the first real Christian emperor because he's not solely Christian.
Because he's still making them worship the unconquered sun?
He's not making them. In fact, that's the one thing about the Sol Invictus. The Sol Invictus was actually put in place by an emperor, I think it's Dacia, in which they basically say, all religions are accepted as long as you recognize that the unconquered sun is first. That's not going to fly. Okay? So the one thing is not, he accepts Christianity. He will appoint Christians to places of power. He will allow the Christian church to flourish, but he's still the chief priest of the Sol Invictus.
And he is a Christian as well, personally?
Yes. But there are three stipulations of becoming a Christian at this time period. One, you have to accept the word, okay? But the main one is baptism. That was huge for early Christian church. Baptism was an outward form of expression of your faith. Constantine is never baptized until his deathbed. He refuses to take full baptism. It doesn't stop him from fixing Christian policy, as we'll find out later. But the one thing is that he is still the chief priest of the Sol Invictus. In fact,
Is it S-O-N or S?
S-O-L, Son Invictus,
Okay.
I-N-V-I-C-T-U-S. Yeah. Yeah, we think we ask like soul as in like the only one, soul as in the sun, S-O-L. And so this is actually a coin of Constantine during his reign as emperor. It shows his face, and on the back, the Sol Invictus.
Looks familiar.
Yeah, it looks like the Statue of Liberty. Yes.
What was the third requirement, except the word?
The third requirement is acceptance of the word and, communion. And then the third is baptism. So, he's Christian, but he's really not. But he's becoming very lenient towards Christianity. And he did actually serve other gods. Now, he thought that this and Christianity are compatible. He does move Christian leaders towards the government. And in 324 AD, it's an imperial decree that soldiers are to worship the supreme God on the first day of the week. So this is actually a proclamation to the armies that they are to worship the supreme God. But the one thing that's very interesting is that when he's talking about the supreme God, he's talking about the Christian God. That they are to worship the Christian God. But the only kicker is that the first day of the week is also the day of the Sol Invictus. See, they have their own holy day as well. Sunday is also the holy day of the Sol Invictus, which is the first day of the week. We look at it as the last day of the week. They see it as the first day of the week. That's how come in the Jewish holiday that the Sabbath is actually their last day of their week. So he does that, but something very interesting happens as well. Just 1 year after this imperial decree that on the first day of the week they're to worship the supreme God, the first conference of what is Christianity happens. The Council of Nicaea. That's 325 AD. Council of Nicaea is pretty interesting. Why? Because Constantine's running it. Constantine has no theological training whatsoever. And he doesn't take any theological training whatsoever. He's the emperor. He doesn't have to. He declares himself the Bishop of Bishops. So he invites all the emperors from the region, and so they all meet at a place called Nicaea. And that's where the Nicene Creed comes from. But the real reason for the Council of Nicaea, they basically get together to deal with several subjects. And one of the main subjects was legislative matters, administrative stuff. It's like, we've got this great religion now, we're actually allowed to come out and practice in public. How do we handle certain things now? I mean, when you think about it, we have a fantastic pastor, we have a great worship group, but you got to think there's a small army of administrative task people that allow that to happen. That's one of the prime things of the Council of Nicaea. Taking care of administrative tasks, figuring out doctrine. What do we really believe? And they also discovered a movement at that time period which was gaining huge popularity. And it's called Arianism. And I had somebody ask, don't worry guys, it's not like German Arianism. Arianism. And it's actually where you follow a guy's philosophical movement called Arius. Now, Arianism was a very interesting theological movement that was going on at the time period. And we could actually do like a whole lecture just on Arianism because it's kind of messed up. Because what it is the Arianists under Arius believe that Jesus was an avatar of God, not a begotten son, and that Jesus did not exist from the beginning. So
What's an avatar?
There you go. See, we're working along, guys. All right. I could give you like the really like cool answer, or I could like give you like Okay, who saw the movie Avatar? Remember how they're asleep and then they're put into the bodies of those creatures?
Yeah.
That is an avatar, to where you are existing in another body, and that other body is a representation of you.
So is Jesus the body and God's in
Is it Jesus?
body?
Yes, but Jesus is a completely normal person. To where the Arianism, they actually will not acknowledge John. In the beginning there was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. They don't believe in that. They think Jesus is a completely separate being from God. And so, in a way, Jesus is a normal person. God then enters Jesus, and then Jesus does what he does because he is basically possessed by God. And then at the cross, God leaves Jesus. And it's like, that sounds not right. But it gained a huge political movement during this time period, including later, you'll realize that certain emperors believed in that. And so they pushed their own agenda based on that. Now, out of all of this became what is known as the Trinitarianism, the belief of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And at this Council of Nicaea is where this first Nicene Creed, based off of that one creed that we talked about earlier, becomes a little bit more fleshed out to cover the Arianists, as well as we still have Gnosticism running around as well. We talked about how Gnosticism is where they, yes, Miss?
No, go finish your
Where
thought.
they basically believe that Jesus himself was not a physical person, he was spirit only. Yes?
So my question is, then the Council of Nicaea was made up of emperors? Were there no
They're made up of bishops.
bishops? Okay.
Yes.
You said emperors.
You said
Oh,
emperors.
well, no, I mean, but what happens is later, other emperors, including Constantine's son, is an Arianist.
Okay.
He's not Nicene.
But were there any people that studied theology at the council?
Yes, they're all bishops. They're all bishops. They're all leaders. They're all church leaders. But they all have different opinions. You know, because remember, they're all from different regions of this empire. It's huge at this time period. And also, during this time period, if you actually wanted to like move, you're talking about a vast distance. So if somebody is a bishop like in North Africa, they're going to have to take a ship all the way across the Mediterranean to Turkey. You know, we're talking on a sailing ship, we're talking several days of misery. It's not like, you know, can I Skype this meeting? No. You know, and so what happened is because they're all broken up and they're in different regions, they are all influenced by people within that region. And so a lot of the bishops either believed in what's known as the Nicene philosophy, to where we have a Father, Son, and Holy Spirit are equal, or they are Arian, in which they believe that Jesus is not equal to the Father, and that he is separate. So, out of that comes what's known as, at the time, it was called the Creed of Caesarea. And so, in order to like fix all of this, they had to try to get, and it didn't completely take root, but they did write this up, that this would be one of the proclamations that a Christian had to take in order to be recognized as a Christian. And it said, we believe in one God, the Father Almighty, maker of all things, visible and invisible. And in one Lord Jesus Christ, the Son of God, the only begotten of the Father, that is the substance of the Father, God of God, light of light, true God of true God, begotten, not made, of one substance, both in heaven and on earth, who for us humans and our salvation descended and became incarnate, becoming human, suffered and rose again on the third day, ascended to the heavens, and will come to judge the living and the dead. and in the Holy Spirit. But then they have this like little like P.S. at the end that says, but those who say that he was not, and that before being begotten he was not, or that he came from that which is not, or that the Son of God is of different substance or essence, or that he is created or mutable, these the Catholic Church anasthetizes. Yeah, it's kind of like they're trying to eradicate the Arianism. Does it work? It's hard to get 300 people to agree on a potluck. Okay, so you can imagine what it's going to be like for theology at this time. And this actually will provide that one thing that we talked about will later be changed a little bit. And that first section will become the first true Nicene Creed, which the Catholic Church will actually recite for many, many years after this. Now,
Can I just ask you a question? I didn't take notes and I should have. But when we talked about Gnosticism and the creed, what was that one called again and what year was it?
Gnosticism?
Yeah.
Gnosticism is like almost from the very beginning.
But the creed that the church established with the 3 points? You talked about
The Apostles' Creed.
Apostles' Creed.
The
Thank you.
Apostles' Creed?
Thank you. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, so another huge thing happens during this time period. Constantine bails on Rome. He's like, Rome is not where the empire's at. It shouldn't be where the empire's at. Why? Because for a long time, the empire in a way was almost divided in two. We had an Eastern Empire and we had a Western Empire. With Licinius gone, and Constantine runs the empire by himself, he realizes something is pretty interesting. He's got Europe pretty much buttoned in. His main issue is going to be the East. And so what he does is he makes a huge political move. And he moves the heart of the Roman Empire to the city of Byzantium. And that is, da-da, right here. It's in this little tiny nugget right here between Thracia and Galicia, which is Turkey. So he moves it right here. It's like, that's like the smartest thing he ever did. You're like, that's kind of lame. Rome was kind of awesome. We got all the temples and everything like that. And he's like, no, this is going to be great. You know why? He bought himself huge portions of the Mediterranean he can now control. This little section right here is called the Bosporus. And by moving his capital right here, he now has complete military and naval access into what's called the Black Sea. And it's a huge Roman outpost. So it has everything that you would need. It has the Roman baths, it has Roman civilization, it had a hippodrome, horse races, gotta love horse races. Okay? So it was like the peak of the Roman Empire. It's not Rome. And the one thing is everything is going great. Here's a medieval drawing of what Constantinople was. And the one thing is actually like 2 parts, to where it like jets out, and then it kind of like reconnects right here. And you could actually sail ships up what's known as the Bosporus into the Black Sea. And by controlling it, you control everything in that area. And then when he founded it, this is what's called the Column of Constantinople. And that column was actually built right after he took it over, and that was in 330 AD.
What modern day cities are there again?
That's now known as the city of Istanbul. Yeah, there's like a cool little song about that from Animaniacs when I was a kid. He knows it! Okay, yeah. It's now known as the city of Istanbul. Okay, so let's talk about this really quickly. We'll go back to it. Okay, because I think it's actually kind of important from a world view. Byzantium, huge empire, Roman Empire. But because it's so far east, it's got that little bit of a nice way of saying it, like a Persian je ne sais quoi to it. You know, they have a huge influence from the east. Rome it's very flourishing there and stuff like that. When Constantine moves his capital there, he calls it Constantinople, and he does huge additions to the city, including, I'm kicking myself right now, because I'm the art history guy as well. I'm kicking myself right now because he's in charge of building this huge thing, which was the Basilica to Saint Sophia in the heart of Constantinople. I mean, this thing it's this huge, beautiful church. And so it's actually held all the way by the Roman Empire, all the way till the 1450s. And then the huge Turkish invasion that comes in, they just decimate the place. And that Church of Saint Sophia becomes the Hagia Sophia. It gets turned into a mosque. And you can still visit it today. And it's absolutely beautiful. It's the same church, but they just, well, let's just say the interior designed it a little bit differently. And they put minarets on the outside. But otherwise, it is exactly the same church as it was when Constantine built it. It is absolutely beautiful. Everything about Istanbul, if you can go, I would say you got to go see it. It has like some of the best of Eastern as well as Western architecture and art. Because it's Turkey and it's Greece. It's a Greek city, but it's so far on the Turkish border. I mean, literally, you could like jump across over into Turkey. That's what's called the Hellespont, which is that little tiny body of water that separates the east from the west. Now, someone else is also very important to this. It's Constantine's mother. Now, when we talk about Constantine's doing double duty, the Sol Invictus and Christian, his mother, Helena, is completely Christian. And she actually does some huge things for that early part of the empire, the new Christian Catholic empire. She is actually portrayed as Saint Helena, Saint Helen. And you always find early iconography will have her portrayed as an equal to Constantine. What does she do? She actually spearheads a huge amount of resources towards the preservation of early historic sites for Christian church. She will travel to Bethlehem, in which she will be the founder of the Church of the Nativity, which you can still visit today. So they actually secured what they actually were to say historically was the birthplace of Jesus, and they built the church around it. So we have a cutaway view of what the Church of the Nativity looked like, and this is actually a photograph from the inside of it that was done. But also something very interesting happens that Constantine does is he actually starts rebuilding what's known as a basilica. You might hear the name basilica for like a large church, but the idea of the basilica itself is actually a Roman invention. The Romans love these things. It's kind of like their temples. And so the Roman church, the new Catholic churches, very much taking on the ideas of the old Roman church. Now remember, we got a lot of people that are playing double duty at this time period. They're both Christian, but they still have pagan parents and stuff like that. And so the introduction of this architecture is very slow and it's gradual. So these new churches will become these huge basilicas, a lot like these Roman temples. But also during this time period, other things will happen that's very important to like Christian theology as well, including huge movements of looking at the Pauline letters of the control of the human body, where Paul says, if the fire burns within you, it's better for you to be married and stuff like that. So what happens is it sounds really horrible, but people almost became zealots in the idea of Christianity, and you had people that were Arianists versus Nicaeans, and they're literally battling it out in the streets. It sounds like, how could that happen? It happens. Because remember, we're still dealing with a Roman mindset, a medieval mindset in a way. Your God's not my God, you're going down. But also, other things that happened, which is kind of very bizarre, was a lot of men actually self-castrated themselves. Christian men. They called themselves eunuchs for God. And that was actually forbidden then in the Council of Nicaea. They're like, you're not allowed to do that anymore. You're looking at me kind of weird. No. Remember, it's a new faith. And so people are taking it from very different points of view. And the one thing is that itself was not that uncommon in the pagan world. The religion of Cybele that the Greeks worshipped, that was then transferred into the Romans. The male priests were castrated. But a lot of things are happening in the church at this time period. But something is very interesting happening within the church itself. The priests, what they then called the elders or presbyters, are now becoming priests. They're not wearing everyday clothing anymore. They're now wearing vestments to mimic the emperor. We're now burning incense, and the communion table becomes an altar. So it becomes more like a church that we see today during this time period. Poor Constantine dies. Supposed to go to his son. That didn't work out too well. Because his son actually had somebody who contested the crown. And that person was Julian, also known as Julian the Apostate. Julian is pagan. And so you had that one little flourish of Christianity. Christianity is the new church. And then you have the new emperor said, that was a bad idea. And so he actually tries to put the empire back to paganism. He doesn't directly persecute Christians, but he tries to bring back the old ways. And he will actually butt heads against several leaders of the early Christian church. And eventually, he will be called the last of the pagan emperors, and everybody after him will officially become Christian emperors. So this is, like I said, this is an age of transition.
How come his son didn't take his place?
Because his son, he actually has 3 sons at this time period, but you can always have a contesting of the crown. And Julian is his first cousin. And so it becomes a battle, actually, a physical battle. And unfortunately, Constantius dies. And the one thing that Julian actually was against the most was this gentleman right here, Nathanius. And the one thing is, he's actually called the Black Dwarf. That's what they call him. I kind of like it. He was kind of short, and but his theological mind was immense. This guy had a great mind attached to him. And the one thing is that he directly goes against Julian, and through different theological debates, this one person will help be the person to basically cement the triune God. He will be a huge person towards the battlefront against the idea that Jesus is a completely separate person than from God. Another person that was actually very interesting during this time period is, has anybody ever heard of Martin of Tours, or Saint Martin? He actually had a very interesting way of dealing with the church, and he actually became a huge church figure. And one of the original story to Martin himself is that Martin was a soldier, and when he was actually on campaign, military campaign, he saw a beggar on the side of the road, and he tore off his cloak, his military cloak, and he ripped it in half and gave half of it to the beggar. And that night he had a vision that Jesus came to him and said, "Whatever you do to my people, you have done for me." And so he'll leave the army, and he'll actually go under the tutelage of a bishop, and he'll actually become one of the more popular figures in early Christianity in Europe proper during this time period. In fact, a lot of people believe that it is from the story of Martin of Tours, who will later become the Bishop of Tours, from his story of giving out his cloak, because the Latin word for a cloak at this time period is capella. And so a lot of people think that that's where the word chapel comes from. A cloak, to be covered. But it's also where chaplain comes from. So the Black Dwarf will actually become a huge power player in Christian theology, backing away from Arianism into the triune God. And then this is actually going to be like the first great Christian emperor. And he is Theodosius. And Theodosius provides, and he actually oversees what is known as the Council of Constantinople, which takes place in 381. And from here, Arianism is pretty much completely wiped out from 381. He actually will, Nicene Christianity under his reign becomes the official state religion. So that's why he's considered the first Christian emperor, because under him, Christianity becomes the state religion, which you will follow. But he's not perfect, okay? So don't get too excited. Remember though, he's still Roman. And the one thing is that he is not just known for, now Christianity is the main accepted religion, so he takes his Roman mindset and he says, because now Christianity is the main accepted religion, if you're not Christian, you will now be punished. Yes?
So does this mean there's no more Sol Invictus?
There's no more Sol Invictus. The Nicene Christianity has officially taken over, which is Father, Son, and Holy Spirit as one. And Christianity is now the main accepted religion of the state. But now he flips over and says, if you're not Christian, now you will be punished, including Jews. So Jewish persecution continues.
Charles, are they killed? Oh, sorry.
No.
Are they killed as punishment? Oh.
Or they're expelled. When we get to the, I think we have like 2 more lectures on, we have the Spanish Inquisition, in which Spain will expel almost 250,000 Jews from Spain. And a lot of them will die because of that. Yeah, it's just what they did, unfortunately. It's very unfortunate. Yes?
So, so then the triune God, or the triune philosophy, so that means that Paul and Matthew and Mark, and they did not ever have that concept of the triune God?
Well, they actually do have the foundation for that.
But I mean, in their mindset, would they have said, this is the way it is? I mean, would they have been preaching that?
I think they are preaching that. Because remember, they're actually empowered, well, because they knew Jesus.
Well, yeah, but I'm just saying that it took so long for it to become official.
Well, the one thing is it didn't become official for 2 reasons. One, Arianism, became a huge stumbling block for the early church, but of course the Roman Empire became the biggest stumbling block. The changing over between pagan gods and the Christian gods. But I think the earliest apostles were triune God from the very beginning. I think the idea of Arianism comes from one person and his personal philosophy. Just as we talked about how there were other early apostolic fathers that started doing their own speculation of the beginning of the world and stuff like that. So this is their own thoughts. This is not divine inspiration brought to them through Christ himself. Does that help though? No? Yes?
I'm
Somebody help?
just trying to,
Yeah.
the way it appears. I mean, I'm a real big, originalist. What does Jesus say? Boom. And then I see how man messes it up and so I'm just trying to see, I'm just putting it into like a little compartment of man coming in and now debating over what Jesus said and then making their own little assumptions. So I'm just trying to keep it all
Yeah,
together.
no, it's completely legitimate. But the benefit of them is they're there when Jesus says it.
Yeah, exactly.
And when Jesus says, I am from the Father, and I am, when Jesus does the I am here, he's using the word of, I am God. Yes?
Well, this is no different than today. People pick and choose what they want to deal with respect to a religion. And that's what happened when you're talking about the Roman Empire accepting Christianity, is that they accepted only what they wanted to at the particular time.
Yeah, as we still do today. Yeah.
It's almost like it evolved into, you took the different ideas and at the council they kind of said, okay, well, let's take a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And now we'll
Like
make this
integration.
the whole.
Yeah, because remember the council, when you're dealing with 300 guys, like I said, you can't get 300 guys to settle on a potluck. There's going to be a certain amount of compromise that's going to happen. And so, yeah, they are compromising, they're making deals, and it sounds really sad, but that is what happens. So, this is our first official Christian emperor. And then let's talk about some other people of early faith. One of the people I want to talk about is Jerome. This is actually for Jerome. And Jerome is born in 348, and he is an admirer of classical learning. Now remember, one of the things that actually helps Christianity a lot is that they have a huge amount of people that are trained in classical studies, Socratic argument, dealing with questions that people might ask during that time period, being able to be rational and progression. He is also has kind of like a not so great reputation as what's the word I'm looking for? Oh yeah, womanizer. But he does do something huge for us. He translates the Bible from Greek to Latin in what's called the Vulgate Bible. And Vulgate simply means the common tongue. So you remember how we talked about how in the beginning, after the Jewish diaspora, the Jews could no longer really speak or read Hebrew anymore because they're all living in different countries now and are being raised in different areas. But the one language that unites them is the Greek with the Septuagint. Rome is now completely in power during this time period. The main language is not Greek that much anymore, it's Latin. And so by actually translating the Bible into Latin, that'll actually become a huge portion of helping the Christian empire. And then these guys right here, they are actually two brothers and a friend. If you had one more, you could form a barbershop quartet.
Yay!
Okay, and these right here, let me find out what I did in my notes, because I like scattered myself this morning, guys. is these are what's known as the Cappadocians. It's a mouthful. Okay? Here we go. Before you guys even think about trying to tackle it, I got it for you. This is why I wish I brought my glasses. Basically, it's a place in Turkey. And they are three guys who will basically help out and make huge influences in the church. And one of them is, see, this is what happened. I changed my thing. No. So we have Basil, who is also known as Basil the Great. He's the gentleman in the center. That's why he's great. And he wrote huge treatises on Christian theology, including completely condemning Arianism. Gregory of Nyssa, and he's famous also on his treatise, but he was actually known during his time period as a Christian mystic, to where he is doing more speculations about who, almost like philosophies of this time period. Who is God? What are we as opposed to God? He becomes like a philosopher of this time period. And then, of course, Gregory of Nazianzus. And he is actually a poet and an orator. And he actually wrote many of the hymns that the early church will use for hundreds of years. And so these three people will actually influence the church greatly. Now, I spoke very briefly about how this gentleman forms that council at Constantinople. So that actually happens under him, and that the influence of these men actually take place under the reign of this emperor, and they will actually do huge things for the Christian faith. And also during this time period, another famous person that comes out of this, what a lot of people are familiar with, is Augustine of Hippo. St. Augustine will come out of this time period as well. And it's out of Augustine. He's born in 354 in a small town in North Africa. And he has a Roman pagan father and a Christian mother. He's actually known for his intelligence, and when he was young, he has a child through a concubine, which he names Adirondas, which means given by God or by God. And he is a student of rhetoric, and he learns to speak and write convincingly. He's also a student of Neoplatonism. So he's also using classical learning for his arguments. And he battles within himself because of how his upbringing, pagan versus Christian. And the most famous thing he ever wrote, he wrote 2 books that you can actually still get today, are the Confessions of St. Augustine, which is actually how he became a Christian, and another famous book that he wrote called The City of God. And you can get both of these. And when he says a city of God, as he means a city built on the love of God and a city built on the love of man. So it's kind of like a dichotomy of how. Yes, ma'am.
And is this at the time that,
Yeah, this is during the time of this emperor.
where they're killing non-Christians?
Yeah.
The love of man.
Oh, wait till we get to the Crusades. Yeah, unfortunately, just as the Romans did, because Christianity is when you think of, okay, again, I love the question, I really do. So we're just going to back this up for just a second, okay? We're all Christians, and we know what we should be doing as Christians, but we're all humans. And unfortunately, during the Middle Ages, we have a feudal society. And a feudal society means if you are not on top, you are in the bottom. There is no middle class. If you are not highborn, you are a servant and a slave. Which means you are property. To be given, sold, killed. If you are different than me, you will be killed, because you are different than me. Am I Christian? Yes. Am I not smart? Yes. That's the whole thing, is there's a difference between how they knelt down and how they gave money and how they built things, but this is a huge thing that happens even today. You're a Christian on Sunday. What do you do with the rest of the week? They tackled this, but they all tackled this with swords. And when we get to the Crusades, it'll be Christianity in a way, and I don't like to use this at all, but it'll be Catholicism at its worst. Where you have a pope that says any man who goes and kills the infidel will be guaranteed a place in heaven. And so what did the Crusaders do? They head on over and they just start mowing people down. Including the first village they ever went to, Coptics, Christians. And they killed them all because they were different. That's the only thing that's truly unfortunate, especially during the Middle Ages. I hate to say it's horrible during the Reformation. It won't be until we get into the 1600s and the 1700s where we start realizing, hey, there are other people in the world that might not believe exactly as we do. Maybe we shouldn't kill them. And unfortunately, from a geopolitical point of view, if you look at the news today, if you look at how they are in the Middle East, you know, people like ISIS and other radical extremists, we were no different. If you're different, you are dead. And that's just a sad reality of the Middle Ages. But there is there is a little bit of silver lining, and don't worry too much. Because there were certain cities during the Crusades, places like Acre, and then of course the city of Jerusalem, to where Jew, Persian, and Christian did have a certain amount of coexistence, especially in the later part of the Crusades. It became almost a small level of tolerance. That was pretty heavy. Gosh, guys, why do you bring that up? No, just kidding.
There are times where there like you still learn through scrolls, or was there like one Bible in a church?
Yeah. Oh boy. Okay. This is where I was gonna get to. Heck, first off, how are we doing on time?
7 minutes left.
Okay. Okay. This is what I was thinking. Nice question, by the way. This is what I was thinking. Next lecture that we're going to be doing. Well, we got to finish this one up. But since you brought it up, I'm going to stop talking about what we're talking about right now. The next lecture that I was thinking about doing is going into the Carolingian Empire, Charlemagne, and the beginning of the Persian invasion under Muhammad, the birth of the Islamic Church. Okay? Because as we know, nothing good comes from the desert. Okay? Or we take a little break on this, and I will work on this all week because I've been kind of thinking about that, and I know several people have been asking about this. What do you say we take a small break on this and we cover how the Bible became the Bible we believe today?
There you go.
Okay? What do you guys think? Sound fair? Okay. You guys are making me work a lot harder now. Because I had the other one done! Okay, but I will do that for you this week, and we'll cover everything, and we'll cover how it started with scrolls, and it started with letters, because that's one of the things that's very interesting, because when we cover like the Pauline epistles, even Paul's like, make sure this letter gets over here, and if you get a chance, make sure you read their letter. And so we're going to talk about how these letters became something that you read at a communion table. Remember how we talked about how the earliest Christians were Jews? And they still went to synagogue and everything like that, but then the first day of the week, they all kind of got together and they would read the Gospels, and then they would have a communion feast together, what they called a love feast, to talk about how, and to come together, fellowship. And so those earliest books will be read. They will be gathered, and then other councils will take place, including councils at Carthage, councils at Trent, and finally people will start saying, okay, we're gonna use this book, but we can't use this book. We'll use this book, nah, no, we can't use that book. And then, so the Bible that we use today versus other gospels that for whatever reason were not what they call canonical, which will then become known as the Apocrypha, which is actually still used in some churches today. All right, how's that sound? Good? Oh, you guys are making me work for it.
Any chance we could add one more, because I'm sure you have everything planned out.
No, I don't.
Add one more week onto it.
This is like an episode of Star Trek where I'm just going to wrap it up in 10 minutes and it's fixed! No, I will make it work. I will make it work. Even if that means that I have to combine the Carolingian Empire into the Crusades.
So we don't lose content.
So we don't lose content. You know? I mean, that's the whole thing. And I warned you all last week, don't come this week because it's all politics. I warned you. Didn't I warn you?
Yes.
Yeah, and you still came. Okay? Now, because all this is going on, we got basilicas going on. Okay, yeah, this is St. Jerome by Caravaggio, one of my favorite artists. So we got basilicas being built, we got priests now wearing these vestments, we got incense being burned. Something interesting happens, huge blowback. A lot of these early Christians are like, no, this is not what Christianity is. Because beforehand, Christianity was about giving away everything and seeking God. But now, with basilicas and priests and everything like that, it's kind of like, well, this is okay. So what happens? Monasticism. Monasteries, monks. Okay? That happens. Starts in Africa. And what happens is these people will actually start branching out, and they will actually very gently change the way Christianity, they'll go back to the roots of Christianity. And probably the most influential of these monks is one known as Benedict. The Benedictine monasteries. And he actually has a very interesting thing. He focuses on what we will later call the Benedictine rule. And the Benedictine rule is stability and obedience. See, these monasteries are very strict in their discipline, but the one thing that he believed is that the stability of the monastery as well, to where if you became a monk in this one monastery, you never left that monastery your entire life. You stayed there, and that's where you died. But also the obedience to the church and the community in which you serve. And so the monk stays where he is joining the order for the rest of his life unless circumstances move him in obedience, where the monk follows the abbot immediately and without delay. He improves the lives of the monks by breaking the lifestyle and providing, Benedict also provides a better diet and lifestyle for the monks. Because the monks were known for their austerity, including early monks in the desert of Africa would actually place themselves in caves, or they place themselves in high towers, in which it was almost like this is, in fact, the word for monk actually means to be solitary, to contemplate God. And then, very shortly after that, by the 5th century, we will actually have our first modern pope, which will become Pope Leo, and known as Leo the Great, who was basically the bishop in Rome and used his political savvy to control politics in the area. And by doing that, he will allow himself to control everything within that area. And so we have our first pope, which is yes, sir.
Forgive the interruption.
No, of course.
What year? You said 5th century, but was there?
I will get an exact date for the 5th century on Pope Leo's ascension. And but his political savvy will be used to control politics, not just in Constantinople, but Rome itself. So we'll start seeing a little bit of to where the power will be leaving Constantinople and returning back to Rome. And so we'll see the ascension of the popes or the fathers after this. And out of all of this comes the Middle Ages. And not just what will happen is that the power of the church will not just leave how it originally it was in Jewish hands with the apostles and how it transferred to Gentile hands. It's now going to go to the hands of another group of people, the barbarians. The Franks will start influencing Christianity, as well as the other tribes that come out of Gaul, which is Germany and France. And will come another group of people that's called the Burgundians. What will happen is it'll do huge changes to the church itself, and the only place that's very interesting that the church will not change is England, Ireland, and Scotland. For very good reason, their isolation. Islands upon themselves. And so, even though we're going to have huge changes in the church, the monastic tradition is actually kept very much alive in that part of the Roman Empire. It's still part of the Roman Empire. It's Britannia, Scotti, and Ireland. And these little monastic, yes sir?
So the Christian religion destroys the Roman Empire? Basically.
Doesn't destroy it, but it absorbs it.
The
empire is Christian now.
but it's disappearing soon.
Well, disappearing under...
There's no more emperors.
We're going to still have emperors for a couple hundred years. Well, the emperor himself, well, you're right, you are correct. The emperor himself, the idea of the emperor himself will be gone, but it'll give rise to the Pope, who is the emperor of the Roman Empire even today. He is the end all of the Roman Empire. But yes, you are correct. The actual empire themselves is collapsing, and we're giving birth to a new group of people, principalities, to where you're no longer like tribal, but you now are under, you have like kings, which are then broken up into farming areas, which are then ran by princes. And these princes are all answerable to the king, who is then answerable to the Pope. Are we convoluted enough yet? But the better part is that these princes later will realize that the church is not the end all. Especially when somebody says, I don't want to marry this person, I want to marry this person. And the church says, no, you cannot marry this person. Or you cannot, in the most famous example of all, Harry Tudor, Henry VIII, to where not only can he not marry somebody, he cannot divorce somebody. Catherine of Aragon, which will lead to the bloody execution of his wives, which will then give birth to the Church of England. But probably the most interesting part of all of this is that these princes, these rulers of these lands, will actually turn against the church. And they will start embracing what will later become known as the Reformation. And what they called this, where they didn't actually say we're going to wage war against the church. They actually said we're going to protest against the church. And that's where we get the word Protestant. To not be against the church, but actually to protest ideas of the church. All right? Guys, it's waffles today.
Oh, good.
You have exhausted me. Thank you so much for coming.